the special report on presidential power, its limits, as Donald Trump tests the executive branch's power, going farther than his own controversial first term. Indeed, he harkens back to presidents who had court clashes over bigger things like wartime powers or when the president may act alone. What wartime leaders like Roosevelt and Truman viewed as a last resort, though, carefully weighed with their experts, with their lawyers, and the nonpartisan civil service that they respected, well, in contrast to that, President Trump has just been rushing towards a first plan without any of those efforts to push these powers, sometimes even when flatly banned by the Constitution, sometimes in ways that his own officials have said is reckless, and when warned by his own aides that he could still lose, and even when it invites a string of losses that he's been facing in these first 7 weeks, including new setbacks and losses in court this week alone. We can show you that on our tracker. Not a single win this week, and largely a losing record over the past several weeks. This is all driven by a strategy that you might call Sharpie first. Sign it and see what you can get away with. And that's actually partly different from Trump's first term when he pushed some orders that were knocked down in the courts. You might remember that. But I want to be clear, and I'm going to walk this through with you on our special report right now. Many things that he did do also followed past norms. Simple example, exit a climate accord. Presidents could do that, just as Biden, after his election, rejoined that same climate accord. That's valid. But this term, President Trump has picked a different strategy. For starters, there's the volume you might have noticed, doubling the orders from his first term. He's rushed out an unusually high 89 executive orders, signing more in the first 10 days than any recent president did in their first 100 days.
President Trump has reshaped the government with a flurry of executive orders.
All we have to do is flood the zone.
He has just signed a number of these executive orders.
Just overwhelmed the opposition.
The flurry of executive orders has been head-spinning.
It has been an unprecedented situation to have dozens and dozens of executive orders within the first week.
They'll bite on one and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover.
The initial rush could seem overwhelming to track, but that doesn't mean there's no way to ever, quote, recover, as Trump campaign vet and convict Steve Bannon argued there, especially if many of these orders ultimately fail to stay on the books, if they just lose in court. So the legal history is instructive. Donald Trump likes to argue that he is a unique disruptor. And there's something funny I've mentioned to you before if you watch this program. His critics sometimes strike a similar note. They make Trump sound like every single thing he does in government is unprecedented or that extreme. But the history is more layered. Trump is pushing limits. He is breaking ground with some orders that are flatly illegal under current precedent, while in both parties, most presidents have avoided that out of respect for the rule of law, sometimes out of a general idea that getting knocked back a bunch early in your term wastes capital and time. But as mentioned, there have also been these intense times in history where presidents did try to do more with executive power. Take those wartime eras that I briefly mentioned, where you had bold government and you certainly had more public unity across America. Note the comparison here. Only Presidents Truman and FDR come close on total orders. Truman with 52 in those first 100 days, and FDR with over 90. It depends slightly on how you count executive actions in that era. But they were combating existential threats from World War II and then its aftermath, which of course came after a punishing depression. FDR famously wielding his powers and taking on bankers to try to rewrite labor and business law basically on the fly. He also tried to change the Supreme Court itself with a court-packing plan, which not even Trump has tried, by the way, or perhaps yet. And Truman, a veteran, tested using those war powers like FDR to take control completely of domestic businesses. Again, testing what the courts would do while also trying to reform the military.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency.
I and so many other men and women of color who have served this nation in uniform owe so much to President Harry S. Truman. He used an executive order. Why not a law? Because you could not have gotten a law passed in the Congress of the United States in 1948.
Colin Powell speaking about it personally. He's someone who, of course, served his country in many roles. And you heard the rationale there. Sometimes you test and push the power. You know Congress won't give it to you. So you see if it's lawful. In that case, talking about Truman integrating the military, what many see as a high point. It's a long ways from that kind of power and pushing boundaries for those kind of goals to what Trump is doing in the current strategy. And I say strategy based on the evidence. This is not just some legal blundering into a bunch of court losses. These aren't just mere PR tactics like so many Trump antics. This is not, based on what we know, just some executive order version of hulking out. And by the way, it's not just overwhelming everyone like Steve Bannon said. Remember, Bannon ran the winning 2016 campaign. He's strategic enough to know you don't announce the entire playbook while you're running the plays against the other team. And so let me show you what our reporting suggests about this strategy right now. This Trump executive order playbook is, one, the rush of orders. Some standard, like I mentioned, some very questionable, and many likely flatly unlawful under the current precedents. That's one. Two, and this is different, lean into these court challenges and fast-track your appeals. The Trump administration has now been asking judges over these past 7 weeks to do something most administrations do not do. Take the cases, rush the answers. Basically, they want this fight. They've been filing these emergency appeals, which I'll talk about more in a moment. Anything to speed up the cases that are, remember, challenging whether Trump even has these powers under executive orders. It's the opposite of Trump's entire legal strategy over the previous 4 years in his own criminal cases, where he tried to run out the clock and ask for more time and then got the Supreme Court to delay the biggest trial he faced so much that it didn't happen by the election. If you're hearing my voice, you probably follow the news. You probably remember that, all the delays. And some of his supporters said it's only fair. These were unprecedented cases. Many critics said it was a kind of cynical tactic to run out the clock, but certainly you remember the delay, right? Well, now they've gone from delay to a sprint, often welcoming. What we can show you are now over 100 legal challenges to many of those executive orders written by Trump to try to seize powers that are so extensive that often they're ripe for suing.
With more on this, Kevin, walk us through what the judge said here.
Yeah, and you do see the legal machinery working very quickly after the president signed this proclamation. Only a few hours ago, the judge had already blocked its use from deporting 5 specific migrants that the administration had been targeting. What he has done now is expanded that to include all undocumented migrants who are being held in custody for whom this proclamation could apply. And he said that it was necessary to move very quickly here because, according to the plaintiffs in this case, some of the planes had already been loaded and ready to go to deport these people outside of the United States. And so this is on hold now for 14 days, and a hearing has been scheduled for later this month. But what this act would do, it's the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. It's a centuries-old law that would give the president sweeping authority to deport certain undocumented migrants. It's meant to be used during wartime. What President Trump says he wants to use it for is to deport migrants who are associated with the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. You know, this law has only been used 3 times previously, during the World Wars and during the Japanese internment era during World War II. And I think it all comes against this backdrop inside the White House of frustrations on the part of the president and on the part of some of his advisors that the deportations he promised as a candidate are not happening quickly enough. And this law certainly would have allowed for sweeping authority to begin those deportations very quickly. But like so many else of the president's orders, it has now been blocked by a court, and it will move through the court system as the president and the Justice Department plan to appeal.
Back with me, Vaughn Hilliard, Mary McCord, Sky Perryman, and George Conway. All right, I want you to play this out for me 2 different ways. What happens if there are folks inside DOJ who are willing to carry his water as he dictated today? And what happens if people just leave en masse?
Well, I think first of all, there already have been dozens and dozens who have left. The civil division, as of I think a week ago, was down 30% and is probably down more. There will be people who see opportunity. Of course there will. I mean, it's a big place with a lot of attorneys, and some will say this is my ticket, but there's peril that comes with this, because I think will be an accounting someday for lawyers who violated their ethical obligations and the rules of professional responsibility. And many of the things that Trump was promising today that his attorneys, not the United States' attorneys, but his attorneys would violate those professional responsibilities. A lot of things that people are having to argue in court right now, because I think they've been told by the administration what to argue, are skating close to the line because they are objectively don't appear to be fact-based. I mean, I understand when you're saying, you know, Elon Musk has no authority, that's what you're being told to say. But again, I'm going to come back to we're not stupid. We can see what's actually happening. And that's why you've seen judges like Judge ÜELLLÅ yesterday saying, this is a sham.
Again, guys, it's important to understand that Trump is taking these massive legal defeats. And this goes all the way back to a previous one, which is why I have that quote in the title. That Trump is not a king, right? Remember when they said, like, you know, plaintiff is not a king, plaintiff is not a monarch, he's not above the law. He was president, and now he's no longer. That was referring to this idea that Trump, because he was once president, had for life these sort of powers, when he didn't. And even if the president is, to a degree, in some cases we've seen above the law, the Supreme Court has said, to a degree, the president is a special person. The president is still not 100% in all manners infallible, like he's some kind of orange pope, right? Like, we all understand this. And what the judge said tonight, what the judges have been saying, is they've been stopping Trump dead in his tracks, not just disagreeing, but issuing very sharp orders. Because Trump's moves have been so egregious, it's easy for the judges. But two, because his actions cause so much chaos, the judges are forced to make these harsh, immediate rulings to stop the chaos. So one of the rumors tonight, at least, was like the judge said, you know, you're trying to deport these people, but you need to turn the planes around, because they understood that Trump is trying to do this, immediately just remove people, the judge says, without authority. And the judge is like, no, because what's going to happen is you're going to get rid of them, and then you're not going to bring them back, right? And so the judge knows Trump is bad faith, and so ordered him stricter than you might expect. The judges are not playing around. Republicans are saying that this is bad, but what they're actually saying is we want Donald Trump to be our king, but everything tells us that he's not a king.